The US military is facing wave after wave of Iranian Shahed drones, and they don't have a whole lot of answers for them. So, in a twist that not many saw coming, Ukraine could be supplying the US with weapons and not the other way around. Ukraine is still asking for high-end systems like Patriot batteries to deal with ballistic missiles and other more complicated threats, but at the same time, they have a lot of cheap drone killers like the P-1 Suns and the Bullets, and so Washington is looking at Ukraine and asking, essentially, can we get some of those cheap drone killers? Over the last few days, reports have come out that Washington and others have been asking Ukraine about their interceptor drones. Zelensky said that Washington had asked Kyiv for help, and by March 9th, he said Ukraine had received 11 requests for help for countering Iranian drones from countries near Iran, plus from the US and Europe. It was also reported that Ukraine even sent people to Jordan to help the US there after a THAAD radar was either destroyed or heavily damaged by Iranian drones. So today we are going to talk about what these Ukrainian Shahed-killer drones actually are, how they compare with American counter-drone systems, and why this is a big deal for Ukraine. First, what people are calling Ukraine Shahed-killer drones are really a family of low-cost interceptor drones built to get up fast, find a hostile drone, and kill it on the cheap. Some are basically just really fast FPV-style drones, while some are a little more complicated than that. Some of them might ram the target while others use a small warhead, but they all do one thing, and they do one thing relatively well, and that is kill Shahed-style drones. Shaheds are not terrifying because they are advanced in the way that an F-35 is advanced. They're terrifying because they are cheap, numerous, and effective enough to make your air defense math just plain stupid. They force you to spend more than you want, and sometimes even more than you can. If they don't kill you directly, they can still drain your missile stocks, stress your crews, and force you to hold your higher end systems on station for lower end problems. Ukraine has had years of very direct incentive to solve that problem. Two of the names that really keep popping up, and I'm just going to focus on these, but there are a lot more, are Skyfall's P-1 Sun and General Cherry's Bullet drone. The P-1 Sun looks like the more mature of the two. Skyfall has described it as modular and 3D printed, made for rapid production. Open reporting puts the speed at about 300 kilometers an hour with the ceiling of around 5,000 meters and roughly 14 to 17 minutes of endurance depending on how it is configured. It appears to use thermal imaging and computer vision tools to help find and finish targets, so this is not just a guy manually chasing a drone through FPV goggles the entire time. But it is not magic either. To work well though, they still need the rest of the chain, some way to identify the target, cue the intercept, keep communications working in a jammed environment, and get an operator onto the right piece of sky before the drone makes its final approach. And then you have General Cherry that says the Bullet is designed specifically for Shahed-style targets and similar drones cruising in roughly the 230 to the 250 kilometer an hour range. Specs on this put the Bullet at about 310 kilometers an hour of a top speed with up to 25 minutes of cruising endurance, a tactical range of roughly 17 to 20 kilometers, an effective altitude of about 3,000 meters, and a small nose-mounted warhead. It also comes in day, night, and terminal guidance variants, which suggests a system that still relies on people and external cueing to get into the fight, but uses onboard sensing to make the last part of the intercept easier and more reliable. Now, these are not cure-alls for the Shahed threat. Neither one is a standalone plug-it-in-and-forget-it weapon. They still need trained operators, target detection, resilient comms, and integration into a larger air defense picture to be more than just fast-flying objects. They also do have a fairly limited range and can't cover large areas very well. But with an estimated cost of $1,000 for the P-1 Sun and just $2,100 for the Bullet, I have a feeling that not many people are going to complain about that 20-kilometer range, especially when looking at fancy interceptor price tags. A single Patriot interceptor like the PAC-3 missile costs around $4 million each, and we only make about 600 of those a year. Estimated Shahed 136 type drones cost roughly $35,000 to $100,000, and those are being mass-produced by the tens of thousands every single year. That is an almost incomprehensible cost and production difference. But as we have said before, that $4 million interceptor is usually defending assets and lives worth far more than $4 million. And these little interceptor drones are not meant to replace those PAC-3s. A drone interceptor that is great for chasing a Shahed around the sky is not the same thing as a system meant to stop a ballistic missile screaming in at much higher speed. Ukraine, the United States, and everyone else still needs these high-end ultra-capable interceptors because it still faces threats that these cheap interceptors were never designed to handle. So the right way to think about these systems is as part of a layered defense. At the high end, you still want the big, expensive things for the really nasty stuff. And at the lower end, you want cheaper tools for cheaper threats. Ukraine's point is that too many countries are still trying to solve a low-end drone problem with mid and high-end weapons. There is also a manpower and complexity issue here. A Patriot battery or another ultra-capable air defense setup brings radars, launchers, support vehicles, trained crews, maintenance demands, and a lot of coordination. Those systems are essential, but they are not ideal for spending every night chasing relatively cheap one-way attack drones. There is another catch too. These drone interceptors are not just little flying bullets you hand to somebody and forget about. They still require trained crews, target detection, radar integration, and good coordination to avoid friendly fire. Skyfall says it runs its own 3-week academy for pilots, and manufacturers have said that the bigger challenge is often not the drone itself, but training crews and integrating the interceptors into a broader system that can find and track targets at a useful range. What makes these so appealing to a potential customer like the United States is that the drone is sold with the tactics, the training, plus the rest of the kill chain that Ukraine has already built out of a deep necessity. Now, to be fair, the United States is not really starting from zero here. It already has multiple ways to kill drones that aren't as expensive as a PAC-3 missile. Raytheon's Coyote is probably the clearest dedicated example. This is a low-cost interceptor tied into a broader air defense architecture, including sensors like KURFS and the Army's LIDS network. Raytheon says the system can defeat small to large unmanned aircraft from individual drones to swarms. So this one is not just for tiny quadcopters, it is built to cover a pretty broad slice of the drone problem, including larger Group 2 and Group 3 style threats. We do have a video where we go much more in depth on the Coyote, so go ahead and check that out next if you want to learn more about it. Then there's Anduril's Roadrunner M, which is a little bit more ambitious. It is a high explosive vertical takeoff interceptor meant for harder aerial targets. This one sits a little higher on the threat ladder. Conceptually, it is not just about hunting medium drones. It is also sold as something that can go after faster, more dangerous threats and potentially even cruise missile type targets, depending on the setup. That makes it more capable in some ways, but also farther away from the very cheap Ukrainian formula. Another example is Mirops, another drone-on-drone interceptor. This is a compact system that can be moved in a pickup truck, find incoming drones, and close on them even in a jammed environment. And the US has been looking at airborne counter-UAS options too. The Army has demonstrated Apaches using multiple armament choices against drones, including Hellfires, JAGMs, Hydra 70 rockets fitted with APKWS guidance kits, and even 30mm rounds. Most of us by now have seen those videos of UAE and Israeli Apaches taking out Iranian Shahed drones with just a 30mm cannon and regular old ammunition, and I'm willing to bet that that capability will become even more enhanced with the addition of the XM1225 Aviation Proximity Explosive, or APEX round, which the US has recently tested. So the story really isn't that the United States has no answers and Ukraine has all the answers. It's more that Ukraine has spent years coming up with ways to kill Shahed-style threats without making it super expensive so that they can keep doing it night after night after night as Russia's 3-day special military operation stretches into its 4th year. By now though, you're probably asking yourself why Ukraine is talking about exporting weapons when it is still very much fighting a war for its survival. Ukraine banned weapons exports after the full-scale invasion began in 2022 because, obviously, they needed every piece of gear that they could get their hands on. But by 2025, Ukraine's defense industry was producing more than the country could buy. Put another way, they had excess production, and when you have excess production, you find somebody to buy it or you risk losing that production capacity. Reuters reported in February that Ukraine's annual defense production capacity now exceeds $55 billion and that the sector includes more than 1,000 companies, including around 450 drone producers. So in June 2025, Zelensky launched the Build with Ukraine initiative, saying that the country would start exporting military production technologies by opening production lines in European countries, with the focus being on drones, missiles, and possibly artillery. So the shift really started last year and not last week like it may seem, and it may seem like that because the more formal step came in February 2026. It was reported then that Ukrainian producers had received the first wartime export licenses. But even here, we really need to be careful with the word export. Because what Kyiv appears to be building is not just a traditional arms export model where finished weapons leave the country. Among the applications approved by the Export Commission, none involved ready-to-use weapons, and most were aimed at re-importing those arms back into Ukraine for frontline use. For example, Ukraine is already moving into joint production abroad. A drone plant has begun operating in Britain, and Zelensky said in February that he had already received the first attack drone from a joint Ukrainian-German production line. So it isn't really that Ukraine is looking to build weapons in Ukraine and then ship them outside the country. What they've been public about up to this point is more of a licensing and IP agreement, and potentially trading that for the fancy stuff that they cannot easily produce. A lot of this looks more like technology transfer with joint ventures, licensed production, components, services, training, and production abroad using Ukrainian know-how. So when people say things like, how can Ukraine export weapons when it's still under attack? The answer is that in many cases, it is more like that they aren't baking the cake, they're just selling the recipe. And that gets to something else worth mentioning. The US and others may want the ecosystem from Ukraine, not just a flying airframe. Current talks include not just the interceptor drones, but also the systems to listen for the incoming enemy drones and disrupt their communications. In plain English, that means electronic warfare, sensing, and software integration are part of the offer. Software development and electronic warfare integration are hard, and that is part of what makes a more plug-and-play Ukrainian system so valuable. The airframe does matter, but so does how quickly those systems can be adapted, how it gets integrated with sensors, how crews are trained, how jamming is handled, how targets are identified, and how the whole network keeps functioning while someone is actively trying to break it. Now, for the very obvious problem. Ukraine seems to really want to trade this expertise and these drones for high-end systems it still cannot build at home, especially Patriot batteries. The big hang-up here is that the war with Iran is already straining the supply of those higher-end systems and missiles. This means very simply that supplying Ukraine with these higher-end systems and missiles may not happen, or it could just be delayed. Ukraine is offering something valuable. The US and its partners clearly have an interest, but the things that Ukraine most wants in return are exactly the things already under pressure. And Washington doesn't have just the Middle East to worry about here. It also has to think about every other theater where missile inventories and deterrence still matter, because the Pacific did not stop existing just because Iran jumped to the front of the line. But if the Ukraine can help the US and Gulf partners answer Shaheds with cheaper interceptors, then in theory that also helps preserve the scarcer high-end missiles for the targets that actually require them. That is probably the most realistic and likely version of this deal. So the real headline here is not that Ukraine is exporting weapons while it is still under attack. It is that Ukraine has built something that other countries suddenly need, and need desperately. Even if the war with Iran ends tomorrow or is over by the time you watch this, I'd still expect the US to give Ukraine a call and see if they can work something out, because Shaheds aren't going anywhere, and every adversary around the world is now witnessing in real time just how effective they are. So go ahead and leave us a comment down below with your thoughts. Now it's everybody's favorite part of the video, and that is channel update time. I wrote this script and Savvy edited the video. In the last, well, not the last video, on the Gerald R. Ford video, I left my email like I always do. It's kyle.gunn@taskandpurpose.com, but I really want to start doing corrections at the end of the video. Corrections that you guys all email me about through the email with the subject line corrections. I'm not an expert. I'm not even that smart. If I'm being completely honest, I don't know a lot of this stuff until I start getting into it and doing the research. And then I learn a lot about it and I write it down, or David writes it down, and then I read it into from a teleprompter into a camera, but I get things wrong. I don't want to get them wrong. I want to get them right because I take pride in my job, but I am human, so I'm going to get them wrong. So if you all could help me out, if I make a big mistake, I mean something big, not like I misidentified one little bitty thing, but like if I call Bradley and Abrams, go ahead, shoot me an email with corrections in the subject line so it doesn't get buried under all the other. My inbox sucks, all right? I'll just be honest. So help me out and put corrections. And at the end of videos, I'm going to go ahead and issue those corrections so that, one, I can, fix mistakes that I've made, because I'm not kidding. If I make a mistake in a video, it like eats at my soul for days, and I think about it all the time. I'll be doing something completely dumb and I'll just be like, oh, that really sucks that I got that wrong. And then it sits in my brain. So this is going to be my way of kind of getting past that and just, having more of a rapport with everyone watching. Because once again, this is not from me to you. This is like a joint effort between all of us. I really do think that it makes this job a whole lot easier. So help me out. Send me an email when I make a mistake. Just, you can be mean about it. I don't care. You're not going to hurt my feelings. But you don't have to be. If you want to be nice about it, you can do that too. And if you have anything else you need, shoot me an email at kyle.gunn@taskandpurpose.com. Just reach out to me. I'm going to stop it there because this video is probably long enough. I'm Kyle, your friendly ginger producer man. You are all dismissed. I will see you next time. Thank you so much, sincerely, for being here. Go ahead and hit subscribe.